Hi everyone. All right, I just read the song today,
A
and
woman lost her life in a tragic accident. A rising country star was behind the wheel, and yet no one will face charges. At first glance, it doesn't make sense. How does a fatal crash end with no legal consequences? But what really happened behind the scenes, and why the victim's own family made a decision that shocked everyone? That's where this story takes a turn no one expected. It all started on a quiet night in June 2025. Connor Smith was driving through Nashville when everything changed in an instant. A 77-year-old woman, Dorothy Dobbins, was crossing the street inside a marked crosswalk. Seconds later, she was struck by his pickup truck. There were no signs of reckless behavior. No indication of substances and nothing that would suggest anything beyond a devastating mistake, but the impact was severe. Dobbins was rushed to the hospital, and despite efforts to save her, she later passed away. Just like that, a normal night turned into a tragedy that would ripple through an entire community. First, it seemed like a straightforward case, but that's not how things unfolded. The night of June 8, 2025, started like any other: quiet streets, routine traffic, nothing out of the ordinary. But in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Connor Smith was driving his Chevrolet Silverado through Nashville when he approached a crosswalk. At that same moment, 77-year-old Dorothy Dobbins was making her way across the street, something she had likely done countless times before. What happened next would turn an ordinary evening into a tragedy that no one saw coming. According to early reports, the collision occurred as Dobbins was in the crosswalk, a detail that immediately caught attention. Authorities later stated that the preliminary cause appeared to be a failure to yield the right-of-way to a pedestrian. Still, they were quick to clarify something else: there were no signs of impairment. No alcohol, no substances, nothing that pointed to reckless intent. Just a single moment that went terribly wrong. Dobbins was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her. But despite their efforts, she later passed away, leaving behind a grieving family and a shaken community. And just like that, a rising country star found himself at the center of a heartbreaking situation that couldn't be undone. At first, it seemed like a clear-cut case, an accident with devastating consequences and a legal process that would follow. But as the days unfolded, it became clear this story wasn't going to follow the path everyone expected. In the days after the crash, the situation quickly moved from tragedy to legal scrutiny. Investigators reviewed the scene, witness accounts, and early findings all pointed in one direction. Authorities stated that the likely contributing factor was a failure to yield the right-of-way to a pedestrian, something that, under normal circumstances, leads to legal consequences. Soon after, a misdemeanor citation was issued against Connor Smith. For many watching from the outside, this felt like the beginning of a predictable process. A life had been lost. There was a clear point of fault. And now, it seemed the legal system would take its course. But this wasn't just any case, because the person involved wasn't an unknown driver, he was a rising name in country music. And that changed everything. The story began gaining attention far beyond Nashville, with fans and critics alike watching closely to see what would happen next. Some believed the case would send a strong message about accountability. Others argued it was a tragic accident, not something driven by intent. The conversation quickly became divided, with emotions running high on both sides. Still, most people agreed on one thing: the legal process was only just beginning. Or at least, that's what it looked like, because just when it seemed like the outcome was already written, everything suddenly took a turn no one saw coming. Just when it seemed like the case would follow a predictable path, everything changed. The misdemeanor charge against Connor Smith was suddenly withdrawn, not because of a lack of evidence, not because of a technical loophole, but at the request of the victim's own family. That single detail stopped people in their tracks. Why would a family, grieving such a devastating loss, choose to step back from legal action? For many watching, it didn't add up. Cases like this rarely take such an unexpected turn, especially when the circumstances initially pointed toward responsibility. Officials confirmed the decision, but offered very little beyond that. And with so few details made public, questions started to grow. Some believe the family may have seen this as a tragic accident rather than something deserving punishment. Others suggest there may have been private conversations, moments behind closed doors that changed everything. There's also been quiet speculation online, people wondering if something more happened that the public hasn't been told. But it's important to note, none of that has been confirmed. What we do know is simple, and yet incredibly unusual: the family made a choice that completely altered the course of the case, and whatever led to that decision likely didn't happen in public, because behind the headlines, something else was unfolding, something far more personal than a courtroom battle. As the headlines slowed down and the legal noise faded, something far more personal was happening behind the scenes. According to statements from his attorney, Connor Smith didn't just step back and let the process play out. He reached out. Over the months that followed, he reportedly spent time getting to know Dorothy Dobbins' family. Not through lawyers, not through public statements, but directly, and that changed everything. He expressed what was described as deep and sincere grief. Not the kind you post online for sympathy, but the kind that comes from carrying the weight of a moment you can't undo. The kind that stays with you. It's been said that these private interactions gave the family a chance to see him not as a headline, but as a person, someone who was also struggling to process what had happened, and that human connection may have played a bigger role than anyone expected, because in situations like this, there's often a divide, one side grieving a loss, the other facing consequences. But here, that line may have blurred. Instead of a prolonged legal battle, something quieter took its place. Understanding.as News broke that the charge had been dropped. The reaction online was immediate and divided. For some, the decision felt unexpected but understandable. They saw it as a tragic accident, not something driven by intent. Supporters of Connor Smith pointed to the police findings: no signs of impairment, no reckless behavior, just a moment that went horribly wrong. But not everyone saw it that way. Across social media, questions started to surface. People wondered how a case involving a fatality could end without legal consequences. Some argued that even accidents carry responsibility, especially when a life is lost. Others focused on the unusual nature of the family's request. It's not common for victims' families to step in and influence the outcome in this way, and that alone sparked curiosity. Rumors began circulating. As the debate continued to grow online, Connor Smith finally broke his silence. About a month after the accident, he shared a message that felt far more personal than anything released through lawyers or official reports. He described his heart as broken in a way I've never experienced. And for the first time, people got a glimpse into what he had been dealing with behind the scenes. He acknowledged the weight of what had happened, saying that not a single day had passed without grief, prayer, and mourning for Dorothy Dobbins and her family. It wasn't a long statement. It didn't try to explain everything, but it didn't need to. The emotion behind it was enough to shift how some people saw the situation. For supporters, it reinforced the idea that this was a tragic accident that deeply affected everyone involved, not just one side. Even now, months after the accident, the story continues to leave people wondering, what does justice really mean in a case like this? Is it measured by legal consequences, or by personal closure and forgiveness? The choice made by Dorothy Dobbins' family challenges the way we usually think about accountability, and it leaves a complicated mix of emotions in its wake. Connor Smith has expressed grief, remorse, and ongoing prayers for the family, but the public is left to grapple with the outcome. Some see it as a compassionate act, a recognition of tragedy without punishment. Others question whether the legal system should have intervened regardless of intent or private discussions, and then there's the human side, the pain that can't be measured by charges or headlines. The family lost someone they loved. Connor carries the weight of a moment he can never undo. And the community struggles to make sense of how a rising star's career intersects with life, death, and forgiveness. In the end, this isn't just a story about an accident or a celebrity, it's about the messy, complicated reality of loss, responsibility, and empathy. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Could you forgive, or would you demand justice no matter what? Sometimes the answers aren't clear. But the questions linger, and they make this story unforgettable.